She usually watches it a little bit at home.
Yeah.
Okay, up and running. All right, good evening and Happy New Year. Continues as we come hopefully to the conclusion of Megillah. That is a Masechet Megillah from chapter 4, Mishnah 8. We continue. Do you want to read or I'll read and you ask questions? Okay, Mishnah 8.
I would read. Can I read?
Yeah, read from the one, we got multiple translations. Read from yours.
If one says, I will not go before the ark in colored clothing, he may not even go in white clothing.
Okay, so anytime we see the phrase go in front of the ark or pass before the ark, that is rabbinic jargon for lead the congregation in the Amidah. Right, it's specifically for the Amidah, not for any other section of prayers, but to pass in front of the ark literally means that you are the Shliach Tzibor for the Amidah. And here, and actually throughout all of Mishnah 8, we are mostly worried about heretics, about people that look like a Jew, act like a Jew, but actually they follow some form of distorted Jewish belief. When the person says, I'll lead, but I can't wear colored clothes, no, there's no halakha, there's no mitzvah that says you can't wear colored clothes. Why not? Well, there were beliefs, there were, different sects that had the idea that you shouldn't wear colored clothes while praying, that you should only wear white clothes, or they say, I will not pass in front of colored clothes or with colored clothes, then they're disqualified, right? Even if they're willing to go up there with white clothes, no, we do not allow him to adjust his comfort zone because he may be praying with intention that is towards some heresy. And that is a sign. And part 2 is going to be very similar.
If he says, I will not go before the ark in sandals, he might not even go barefoot. Right?
So if he says, I can only daven barefoot, we don't let him daven barefoot, even though it's okay to daven barefoot. There's more modern discussions about whether you should be wearing shoes as respect, because we cover our feet more for respect now. You don't go to your friend's house and take your shoes off usually. But even then, we're not going to let him do it his way, because even if he does it correctly, his kavanah, his intention, is likely to be on the side of heresy, because he is introducing a stringency, introducing an idea that is a signal of being part of some sect that has other issues. So, I'll give you a more modern example. There are some people who will refuse to lead Hatikvah or refuse to sing Hatikvah. It's not exactly halakha to sing Hatikvah, but that for me is problematic, because if someone says, I don't want to sing Hatikvah, then that hints that somewhere in their mind, the Jewish state is illegitimate in some measure. I don't mean that they are against Judaism or against Eretz Yisrael, the land, but somehow Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, is suspect in their mind. And I would be uncomfortable letting someone daven in our shul, lead davening, who refused to sing Hatikvah. Not that we're going to have them sing Hatikvah, it's not what we do on Shabbos, but if they said, I will never sing Hatikvah, then I don't want them leading Musaf.
The same happened, for example, with Yom HaZikaron.
Yes.
Many people, they don't stop and they continue not only driving, but also doing honking,
disrupting deliberately, yes.
During the siren of the minute of silence during Yom HaZikaron. And that's the same reason, because they don't believe in the state of Israel.
Exactly. Which, all the more so for Yom HaZikaron, it's so much more ridiculous that even if you don't believe in the state of Israel, you have to still acknowledge the loss of the soldiers who defended your life. Even if you don't like the state they defended, you have to like the fact that you're not dead. You would have been. So yes, even more so. So a good parallel example. Part 3.
One who makes his tefillin round endangers himself and does not fulfill the precept.
Okay, so the idea here of making them round is believed by others to mean that he is deliberately trying to make them like curved, and that way it will be less obvious. Because we know the tefillin are meant to be square, with very sharp edges, like a box. Well, I mean, it is a box. And the idea here is that someone might try to make them round, so that way it was easier to, what's the right word? Easier to hide from especially the Romans when they prohibited it. And what the Mishnah is saying here is that A, it's not safe because you're still going to get caught, and B, that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to wear tefillin as the Mishnah tells us tefillin are to be made. And the Mishnah, it's one of the most famous examples of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, of the oral law, is very clear how the tefillin are meant to be shaped. To fulfill the mitzvah, you have to do it like this. And if you don't do it like this, don't think you're saving yourself any danger. The Romans are still going to nail you, right, literally. All right. Part 4 is going to continue on the tefillin theme of heresy.
If he places the tefillin on his forehead or in his palm, it is the manner of heresy.
Okay, so I have to do, visual aid. So if you put your tefillin this, and you put the box of the tefillin on your hand, then that is not the way we do tefillin. But why would someone think to do that? What do we say in the Ve'ahavta? Where's the tefillin described in the Hebrew of the Ve'ahavta?
Here between the eyes and
Beinecha, right? Which is between the eyes. Don't point there. Al yadecha. Yadecha. So what the heretics would do is say, the Torah literally says between the eyes, boop, and the Torah literally says on your hand, boop, and they would attach their tefillin to their hand, to their eyes, literally between their eyes, as a way of in a hyper-literal understanding of the text. Again, this is denying that the explanation of the sages is the correct interpretation of the Torah, and it is somebody who thinks that if they read it, they understand it all on their own, which is an ongoing problem, not just in Judaism, but in any religion, where people are refusing to accept the community's long-held and traditional understanding of verses. You leave it up to individuals, you end up with absolute chaos and usually tons of errors, right? The Mishnah has been peer-reviewed, your individual thought has not.
So if you say here on his forehead, meaning between the eyes.
Exactly. Which
because forehead could be here.
Well, according to the rabbis, no. Right. So according to the rabbis, the forehead where the tefillin is supposed to sit is from the hairline, or where the hairline used to be, up to the crown of the head, the top of the head, which is why your tefillin should be up here, right? But I don't know whether you've ever noticed, but a lot of people, their tefillin, they get stretchy, the straps over time, and they end up drooping, and they're down here. This is not where the tefillin should ever be, right? It always needs to be up here. The general rule of thumb is if you took your thumb from the front of your tefillin and you come down and hit your nose, you're definitely doing it wrong, right? The box on the tefillin has to be tilted upwards so that it's pointing that way. Think unicorn, not rhinoceros.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right.
Nope, it's got to be pointing more upward. So tighten your knots. And of course, like I said, because beinecha, because of the phrase in the Ve'ahavta, between your eyes, people would take that hyper literally. They would lower it all the way down until it was as between their eyes as they could get. Okay. All right, and then part 5, or the 5th section.
I didn't convert it for so many years. Okay.
Yep, all of us did.
No, it's good that we're starting. So
yeah.
Now I know that it was incorrect. And you say that
from your hairline and the crown, exactly.
The hairline is here.
Yeah.
When it started here.
Yeah,
here.
Where the hair begins. If you pull back your hair, but it can be where it used to be, right? So, like for me, my hairline is a little bit higher now than it was when I was, until the top of the head, the crown, right? Where the head begins to curve. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Usually, it's easiest just to line the bottom of the bite of the house, with the box, to the hairline. That's the easiest way to get it set.
Okay.
And it actually, because I was also, because I learned as a young man, but then I didn't do it for many years and then began doing it again later in life, I was also doing it wrong for many years until I finally had a teacher who showed me the proper place. And it actually feels better. It fits better and it's right. If you're looking for a diagram, my last week's Thursday class, I went into Talit and Tefillin, and I put pictures up of where the Tefillin goes. So. All right, last sentence.
If he covered them with gold, or if he placed it on his sleeve, this is considered the way of the outsiders.
Right, so imagine you take a Tefillin, right, and you've made it correctly, but then you want to put gold trim around the outside. And that is, you are separating yourself from our understanding of what tefillin is. Right? Tefillin are not meant to be gilded. That's black leather boxes, and that's it. The sleeve is a little more complicated, both the arm and the head, actually. There can't be any barrier between yourself and the tefillin, which is why in cold mornings, you still have to get your sleeve up and put the tefillin on. And for your head, I remember this came up almost every year in rabbinic school for Purim, that somebody would wear a funny wig or somebody would be wearing some mask. And our dean would say, that's fine, but while we're davening, your tefillin has to be under the wig, right? The tefillin has to be under the mask, not on top of it. So yeah, it's got to be up against you. All right, so Mishnah 9. We're going to continue with the idea of people who are heretics or who are saying or doing things that are outside the norm, but we're moving away from practices and into straight up tefillah.
If one says, a good man shall bless you, this is a heresy.
All right. Sounds perfectly innocent, right? Let the good one bless you, right? But it is implying that there is a good one and a bad one. And that is a form of dualism. But that means you believe there are two powers in the world. This is one of the major problems. Well, there are many, but this is one of the many problems that Judaism has with beliefs that put something like Satan or the devil as being some equal enemy of God. Is no, right? That there is no power, no entity that is equal in any way, shape, or form to God. And bad comes from this one and the good comes from that one, which was a common belief in many ancient religions that had two gods, one that was nice and one that was bad. This would seem to imply that there is a good one, which leaves open the idea that there is a bad one. So we don't use that phrase. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. If one says, your mercy extends even to a bird's nest, or for goodness is your name remembered, or we give thanks.
No, that's not a typo. We said it twice. Okay, so first of all, when it says they silence him, that means if he, well, let's back up. First, before the first, remember that the Amidah used to be more extemporaneous, more spontaneous, improvised. The theme and shape of the Amidah was set. The Hatimah, the finishing phrase was set, and the content was set. But inside each bracha, a person could give a little bit of extra emphasis on different aspects. So that means you never knew exactly what the guy was going to say as the Shliach Tzibur. But if he did say one of these things, you actually would yank him from the bima. You're done. Sit down. You're not leading. Right? If you say one of these things, then you are removed in the middle of the Amidah from your position, which is strong. I mean, if somebody was to say, do a poor job of poetry, they try to do a haiku and they don't do it very well, or they are not very creative. Oh God, you're very, very big and I think you're impressive. Okay, that's not exactly the world's greatest prayer, but we're not going to fire you from Shliach Tzibur in the middle of the Amidah for that. But for these things, they are so serious that you are out. So let's take the last one first. We give thanks, we give thanks. Again, this is implying that there's more than one God. And obviously that's a problem.
Why praise?
we give thanks to you and we give thanks to you. Right? You're thanking two different sources. At least that's the implication. Now, does it mean that absolutely is what the person was thinking?
I thought more like kadosh, kadosh.
But kadosh, kadosh, kadosh is a quote. Is a quote. Right? This is not quoting. This is somebody choosing to say this phrase. Imagine, if you will, that we lived in a community where there were many groups of Jews many Jews who had very different beliefs, but all lived together and all seemed Jewish together. Right? This is what we lived with before the modern world, where we separated into Orthodox, conservative, Reform. Before that, we lived together and we went to the same shul together. Well, imagine there's somebody who secretly believes that there is God and there is also the Asherah, right, which was a very common biblical belief, that there was God and God's wife, basically. Say, we thank you, we thank you. Now, maybe they don't mean it to be thanking two different gods, or maybe they do. But because the belief in one God was so important, and because people kept forgetting that there was only one God and kept inventing other gods, that was so common, this is just a no-go zone. You don't do it. I don't care what you're thinking. You don't do it. And if you say it while you're on the bima, we're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt, because this polytheism was such a problem that you're out of there. Right? They get the big hook and they just pull you off the bima. I don't know if you remember the Gong Show, where they, there used to be like a talent show thing on America where they had a big hook that they would literally drag people off the stage. All right, may your name be mentioned for the good. We're working our way backwards. This implies that God is only present, which again is a problem. That somehow God is not omnipotent, or that God is limited, or that God is unaware or incapable of helping beyond the good, and that's a problem. This is why, by the way, the verse in Isaiah says that God made everything, including the bad. And that doesn't mean that God is causing evil, but it does mean that even when bad things happen, God is still part of the universe and is not absent in that spot. Like Jonah, yeah. I mean, like Jonah, like Job. I mean, over and over again, we get examples that God is still there, even when bad things are happening. Now, may your mercy reach the nest of a bird. This is, of course, going back to the line in Devarim of shooing away the mother before taking from the nest. But the problem with this phrase in the classic world seems to be there's different opinions in the Talmud of what the problem is here. One person says that it's because the person might sound like they're complaining, meaning, God, you care about birds, but what about me? What about us? Right? And another says similar, that your mercy only extends this far, but not into or not further than this. And that means you're limited. You're not able to show compassion beyond this. So there are a number of ways to read this, which it doesn't necessarily mean that this is a bad phrase, but it does mean that this was probably a coded phrase in the ancient world, where that people who followed this philosophy would use this phrase, and therefore it became known. So, again, it's like people, nowadays who will avoid the question of whether Rabbi Schneerson was the Messiah. It's code, to avoid actually saying their belief. So you'll ask some people, do you think he is the Messiah? They'll say, well, can you think of a better candidate? That's not answering my question.
The answer is he had the potential to be the one.
Yeah, he could have been if we had been worthy. Yes, or other phrases like that. But you'll often find in many groups that have those opinions, if you look at their calendars, they won't have the yahrzeit listed. They will have something listed more like the Rebbe's Day. The yahrzeit, right? Like, not if you don't believe he's not dead. Right? You only have a yahrzeit if you're in the ground.
And I never checked that.
Well, because it's code. It's not meant to be a big obvious flag. It's meant to be wink, wink to people who agree with me that this is what it is. It's like the early Christians when they would make a little fish symbol as a way of showing other Christians that there were Christians in the area. You know, that was their code. And these phrases were probably codes for ancient Jewish groups that had philosophies that were heretical. It was their way of winking to each other while leading. And the rabbis knew about them and they said, no, no, if you have the beliefs, you're out of here. And if you don't have the beliefs, stop saying their code words. You know, it'd be like, you know, if a Jewish person got up and said, you know, we thank the Father and the Holy Ghost. Well, you know, Holy Ghost, ghost is the word spirit. You could say Ruach HaKodesh, but that kind of sounds very Christian-y. That's not part of our prayer, right? It doesn't mean that those aren't Hebrew words. You know, Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. It's very famous from a Christian prayer. Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Hebrew version of Holy Spirit. Yes, that is a Hebrew phrase. You put those together, three, and already in Jewish circle we're uncomfortable that you are leaning towards Christian thoughts. That it's just, you use a code line, we're going to respond as though it were code. All right. Now we're going to change to the question of what do we say, or what do other people change, maybe even for good reasons, but we still don't let them change.
If one gives symbolic interpretation to the prohibitions against forbidden unions with silence given.
Okay, so forbidden unions, the section from Leviticus in particular, where it says, you know, do not uncover your father's nakedness, for example. You try to interpret that in a philosophical way, which some of the ancient Jews did, or if you try to interpret that
historical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like sociological, historical.
No. Philosophy way, right? You know, that the nakedness of my father represents the hidden aspect of God's logos and stuff like that. I mean, like real philosophy, you know, sort of mysticism, almost kind of things. And this is saying, no, you don't get to do that, right? And also this is against, according to some other commentators, against making euphemisms, right? I don't want to say your father's nakedness, because that, you know, that sounds, you know, a little too giggly. You know, it makes me uncomfortable to talk about your father naked. So I'll use other words when translating this. Or, as we talked about before, the standard practice was read a line in Hebrew, translate the line into Aramaic. Mm-hmm. When the translation comes, if I change it, or God forbid, when I'm reading, I change it in order to avoid saying the wrong words or to put a different spin on it, no, you're no longer reading. Get out. And then we're going to see similar in the next sentence, in another option.
If one says the verse, and of your children you shall not give over to Molech.
Which is, by the way, from the same portion of Torah.
That you shall not give of your seed to impregnate and gentle woman, who silence him with a condemnation.
Right. So there were apparently those in the ancient world who would translate "don't give your seed to Moloch" as being a prohibition on having children with non-Jewish women. But, well, it is true that we're not supposed to get married to non-Jewish women. Interpreting this verse to mean that, either erases the original prohibition against Moloch of putting your children to death for this god, implies that the punishment for putting your children to death for this other god is the same punishment that you would have for having children with a non-Jewish woman, which would be saying it's the death penalty if you do this, which it's not. We do not kill people who have children with non-Jewish women. It's condemned, but it is not punishable by death.
What is Molech? What is Amalek?
No, Molech is an ancient god of the Canaanites. And they would literally put their children through fire for this god. There's some who say that they threw them into the fire and just killed, the same way that we, you know, do Pidyon Haben, you know, the redemption of a firstborn. They would throw their child into the fire and kill them. Others say that they wouldn't kill them, but they would pass them through the flames. as a symbol of dedicating them to the god. But both are, of course, prohibited.
So the problem here is that you reinterpret the Torah.
It's not just reinterpreting, because I mean there's always room for some interpretation, but you could completely erase the main prohibition, or you could be including a new prohibition or new penalty for something that is not what the Torah intended. You know, if you end up executing people when you're not supposed to, that is still a big problem. It's as we've talked before, it's not always okay to just be more strict. You can't just say death penalty for everything. The Torah only gives us permission to take a life in very, very limited circumstances. Other lines of translation. We finish up on Mishnah 10.
Mm-hmm. 4:10.
Yep.
The last one.
The last one.
The episode of Reuben is read but not translated.
Okay, so this, when we talk about Reuben, we're talking about
when he slept with one of the wives of Jacob.
Probably, right? The Torah itself has what we call an ellipse, you know, the ... where it leaves out perhaps the graphic details of what he did.
Yes.
But
last week, Yaakov calls Reuben about that.
He calls him.
He was pretty clear.
To mount the couch, yes, is perhaps a euphemism by itself. And the idea here is, excuse me, that when you come to the weekly parashah, when you read that, you read it, but you don't translate it into the Aramaic, because it is unseemly to give a translation of what is happening there. I know, shocking, right?
So you don't supposed to translate the episode of Reuben.
When we had the system of one reads, one translates, one reads, one translates.
Because they didn't believe that happened. So
because it is unseemly, it is shameful, it is embarrassing to read that account.
So you got the same problem with the David and Bathsheba. Why not? That's not Torah.
But we are going to get to that. Not particularly Bathsheba, but we are going to get to some other issues of Haftarot. Yes, but this is the first one that we have.
Learn from the past mistakes if you don't read it.
So what's the difference between reading and translating in a weekday or Shabbat ceremony and reading and studying together in the Beit Midrash? Right? When you read and study in the Beit Midrash, you have time to explain, to do commentary, to see the Midrash and understand what's going on. When it's read, translate, read, translate, read, translate, it is just going past the person, and then it seems only like a scandalous headline rather than something that you have a chance to really study and understand.
So you try to avoid embarrassing ourselves.
Well, we definitely try to avoid embarrassing for the worst episodes that are doubtful. Right. So for some other things, yes, we can't avoid, you know, when Moses got angry and hit the rock. Yes, we have to go ahead and read that and translate what happened. But for things that are doubtful, like I said at the very beginning, we're not 100% sure what Reuben did. We've got a lot of strong hints. And in study, we can try to understand what he did. Read, translate, then it's to use the modern term, it's clickbait. Right? It's a headline that gets your attention without enough information before you've already moved on. And then people think they know what Reuben did, but they haven't actually studied it. So given the Hebrew, if someone has taken the time to learn the Hebrew and understand it well enough, good, they probably understand what we're talking about. If not, and then we'll discuss it. So this isn't deletion. This isn't we don't read it. This is, if you're not ready to understand, you're not ready to understand in this setting, meaning the public reading where there's no chance for study and investigation. And I'll say that, you know, I have also found that when it comes to creating sermons or doing other types of things, I have to sometimes choose based on how much time I've got. I have to choose my topics carefully, because some topics will take me longer to explain all of the pieces to help make sure the congregation doesn't leave with the wrong idea. And if I know I don't have that much time, then I'll just have to pick a different topic for my discussion. And I'll save that longer discussion for a Wednesday class, for a nutshell, for other topics. All right, same issues.
The episode of Tamar, however, is written translated.
Right.
Because that changed who was Yehuda.
It not only changed him.
Understand how he became to be the first good son.
Exactly, right. So he ends up improved from the end of the story. And so therefore, it's not a humiliating story, even though there's an embarrassing part of it, because the end of the story is positive and to his credit. All right, part 3, we're going to get a similar issue.
The first narration of the golden calf is read and translated. The second is read but not translated.
Right, so the first section, right, we read it and translate because this is ultimately to benefit, that we know that there is redemption, we know that there is atonement for what we did. That we made the golden calf, but God forgave, and there was atonement and God forgave. The recount, it focuses more on Aaron's part in the golden calf. And again, he does not come out looking good in this. Right? There are a lot of outstanding questions of Aaron's role of, you couldn't have tried to resist a little more.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I don't know how many times I've had people come up when we've read that in shul, and that's the first thing they'll ask me. Say, Rabbi, Aaron gets to be the high priest. Look at how badly he behaved. Da, 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 da. It's like, did you read the commentary? Right? Did you read? I mean, even in the Eitz Chaim, which is only a snippet of commentary, it already begins to explain more of what the position he was in, of what was happening that was in broader context, and why he did what he did. But it's too easy to judge him very, very harshly if you don't have that. So better to save that for when you have more time.
The priestly blessing and the episode of that David and Amnon are neither read nor translated. Okay,
so the stories of David, that's David and Bathsheba, is Amnon and Tamar, which was his half-sister that he raped. So those two stories are not read as haftarot. We don't read those in the public setting. Of course, we still read them and study them, but we don't use those as haftarot. The blessing of the priests, the Birkat HaKohanim, this is a little bit more difficult to understand. And I don't just mean the text itself, but there are two different versions. So the version that we have here, that you don't read it and you don't translate it, doesn't make a lot of sense, because how would you skip part of the Torah when reading it? The edition of the Talmud that quotes this says you read it but don't translate it, which makes more sense. Not because there's anything embarrassing about the blessing, but because the blessing is untranslatable. It is unique in and of itself. It is one of the few blessings that needs to be done in the Ivrit, in the Hebrew itself, but also because of its unique standing, that it should remain as a unique phrase, rather than something that is just mundanely translated. And there's much built into it that it would be very hard to try and translate those few words in only a few words. But it's very difficult to read this section because the Mishnah says one thing, but the Talmud quoting the Mishnah says something else. Much deeper Mishnah Talmud comparative text study. But suffice it that will give us enough to go on for now.
Can you remind me, Rabbi, about the Amnon episode? I can't remember.
So Amnon was one of David's sons, and Tamar was one of David's daughters, but they came from different wives.
Yes.
Amnon fell in love with Tamar and wanted to be with her like a husband. And basically what he decided to do was pretend to be sick and ask if Tamar could bring him the food because, you know, she's so nice and that will help me get better. And so Tamar comes, and when she comes into his room and they're alone together, he attacks her. And then she leaves, and she is in mourning, and I mean, she's just devastated by this having happened. And she even, they even proposed, well, I guess you could marry her. I mean, after all, the Egyptians did that kind of thing all the time.
Who said that?
It's a little, I don't want to go into that, but he refuses, because now that he's had her, he's not interested anymore. And so this is heartbreaking. And then, of course, her brother eventually murders Amnon. And David is sort of very powerless in all of this. He doesn't know how to punish Amnon. He doesn't know how to punish his brother. He doesn't know how to help his daughter. It's just one of the most painful sections to read in David's life. He had real trouble with his kids. That's one of the problems with a hereditary monarchy. All right, now number 5 is going to get us into an even more difficult question.
We do not read the vision of the chariot as a haftarah.
Right, so the vision of the chariot, this is Ezekiel, right? And this is a little bit of a problem because, yes, we do.
Yes.
Shavuot, right? On Shavuot, we read Ezekiel 1. We read this section. The original intent by not doing it, which we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda is, by the way, the one who says, yes, you can. But the original intent from those who said no was, if you read this publicly, not as private study, not as personal discussion, but just as a public thing, it opens the door to mystical speculation that most people are not prepared for, and most people are not going to do very well. The idea of the Merkavah, of the section from Ezekiel, as being a text for mystical understanding of God and the universe, it goes back very, very deep in rabbinic thinking. And the worry here was, if you just read it like it's just reading it, then people are going to catch bits and pieces, but they are going to put them together wrong. And it's kind of like giving somebody, I guess, a Lego kit without the instructions, which, if you build it wrong, will blow up. So you don't want to give them the pieces, blow themselves up. Give them the pieces with the instructions, and that's not called the public haftarah. That means private study. And Chagiga goes into more detail of how to study that. But nowadays, I don't think that we have such a worry, and I think that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think there is such a big worry that the average person is going to leap. I mean, I know from personal experience now as a rabbi for 11 years, reads Ezekiel on Shavuot, they're just confused. Right? They're not beginning to think heretical thoughts. They just think it sounds like a weird dream, and there's no opening of doors.
He was smoking something.
That's the usual thing people say. Is, was he taking drugs? Was he having a seizure? Was he, dying when he? I mean, what was going on? I think all right, but I don't think there is such a worry, and clearly Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think there's a worry, because he says,
however, Rabbi Yehuda, however permits it.
Right. And then number 6 is going to be a totally different topic. Well, I mean, it's the same topic, but a totally different reason for saying no.
We do not read Makenon to Jerusalem as haftarah.
Right, which is Ezekiel 16. Right, and basically because this section is horrific. It is too much to take. I mean, there are sections of the Torah that are predicting the future, that are stomach churning. But that's in the Torah. We have to read it as part of our public reading. We have special ways that we structure it, but it has to be read. But the section of Ezekiel, this does not need to be used as a haftarah. Right? Pick something else. And again, this goes back to our discussion earlier that for many, many centuries, the haftarah was at the discretion of the reader. It was, what do you want to read from today? And then you would get up and you'd read your favorite section, or you'd read a section that you thought had an application. It was a way of doing almost like a pseudo sermon. I think this section matches what we said, and I'm going to, by reading it, I'm going to drive home a point in the Torah portion we'll connect to. But this section, don't do it, says Rabbi Eliezer. It's just too nasty.
But how much terrible? Because we read in Tisha B'Av, I can't remember the name of the book of the Tisha B'Av.
Eicha.
And it's tough. It's terrible. The picture about what happened in Jerusalem in the street. How much difficult could be they make known to Jerusalem?
Well, Ezekiel 16. You can look it up. It is not pleasant, to say the least. But again, there is a feeling with Eicha that even though it is not a obligatory mitzvah, we don't say a bracha before we recite it and such, that it is a fixed practice for our commemoration of Tisha B'Av. This is reader's choice. And when it comes to reader's choice, choose something else. And again, the idea of David and Amnon, if we didn't know if we didn't know what the Haftarah was going to be each week, imagine someone gets up there and starts reading the story of David and Bathsheba. It's like, this is what you pick, right? Well, I mean, just there's so much more that we could study and read that lifts us up and that helps us, grow as Jews. And this is what you pick? Or Amnon and Tamar, like one of the most salacious and heartbreaking sections of the Tanakh. That's what you choose, right? Yeah, Isaiah's all good, right? Pick something from Jeremiah. It's not always happy, but at least it's got nice meaning and is not so disturbing. There are certain things that you could it's reader's choice. Pick something else. And so that was the society that they were working with. Now for us, our Haftarot are set. Readings are all clear. So we don't run into these problems. But we do study them at other times. And if you are not familiar and haven't read through the rest of the Tanakh recently or with good commentary, highly recommend it. It's kind of a good book.
Which one?
The Tanakh, the rest of Tanakh.
Yeah.
Right? Get past Torah, move on from Yehoshua all the way through to Divrei Hayamim, and but definitely not all of it is what we want to read from the Bima on just a average Shabbat. It has to be the right setting. Okay, with that, we say farewell to Megillah, and we will continue next week with something new.